Welcome to the Captain's Table, the Lost Logs. The third attempt I made at running a Star Trek game was late in October 2004, and it was the first time I tried running an ongoing campaign rather than just a once-off session. And my main inspiration for this failed campaign, let's call it, was the video game by Interplay, Star Trek Starfleet Academy. And so my campaign was Starfleet Academy. And it was a next generation game, or that era anyway, using a mixture of some of the Last Unicorn rules and the Farsa rules. So it was quite a jumble. I didn't really know how to choose a rule system back then. And the idea was that the player characters were cadets at Starfleet Academy, and that they'd be doing simulation missions pretty much like in the video game. And this was definitely a time for me to learn that things that work in video game format don't necessarily work in role-playing game format. The campaign only really lasted 2 sessions. I would say the second session was quite successful, but by that point the players were over the idea of it. Yeah, it just wasn't a great success. First session, I copied the concept pretty much from the computer game, where it was just a very straightforward, obvious simulation, right? Go here, blow up these things, learn this skill, a tutorial scenario. And that's very useful in a video game. We have to teach people new controls. Less useful mostly in role-playing games where everybody knows how to roll dice. And you learn the rules as you go along more than anything else. I mean, the entire role-playing game is, in a way, one continuous tutorial. So yeah, the first one, not very interesting. The second one, I based on a pre-written scenario called the Crusoe effect. And the Crusoe effect was a good, interesting scenario, a prime directive type of mission. And the players were quite engaged with that. Afterwards, they had a spontaneous conversation discussing what they could or should have done differently, what the value of the prime directive actually is, whether there should be a prime directive. All very interesting things to discuss and to chew on a bit. So it was a good mission, but the overall campaign just didn't grab anyone, and I think it didn't even really grab me once I got it going, because this was the only Star Trek game I've ever run where there was actually no real starship. I mean, real in-game terms anyway. The whole time they were just in the simulator. I think the biggest weakness of the campaign was not the lack of a starship. I think everybody was fine with the concept of using a simulator. I think the bigger problem was that I didn't have anything really for them to engage with outside of simulations. It was sort of vaguely planned that there would be revealed that there was some sort of nefarious faction within the Academy basically stealing the plot from the video game. But I hadn't even really thought that out properly. I didn't know exactly who was involved or what the stakes were or anything like that. And a major mistake for a long-term plot like that was that I didn't put a hook near the beginning. There was nothing to suggest that this campaign would be going anywhere. Nothing to tell the players, this is what's going to be going on. This is foreshadowing where things will be going later. And because of that, I think they really just saw it as the space simulator equivalent of a dungeon crawl. You know, blow things up, go home. Blow things up again, go home. And then the other very big weakness, and this was a strong weakness of mine for a very, very long time. Strong weakness? A major weakness, a predominant weakness of mine, was very poor NPC design and NPC expression. my NPCs, even if I had an interesting concept for them, I was very bad in my early years at giving them any flavor when they're actually running. They didn't do anything. And that was pretty clear with the relatively small number of NPCs I had at the Academy. Now, that's a mistake, because if you're at Starfleet Academy, you should have room for huge numbers of NPCs, wide variety of them. There should be thousands of other students to interact with, hundreds of Academy staff, and then the entire of planet Earth and the whole of the solar system, and that's opportunities that you don't normally get for interaction with regular, consistent NPCs that you would have in a episode of the week traveling starship type of campaign that I just completely wasted because back then I didn't know what to do with NPCs. So yeah, there was nothing really for the players to engage with outside of the simulations, so they didn't care about it. I tried to set up a system for basically marking them, for figuring out how well they were doing in the simulations, but they kind of resisted that from the beginning. I don't think they were too interested in going back to school. And in hindsight, maybe it wasn't necessary. Certainly wasn't fun. So yeah, after 2 episodes, that kind of fizzled out. I don't remember exactly how the campaign died. Maybe people told me explicitly that they didn't want to play, and I've forgotten that. Maybe we just set up something else instead and never got back to the Star Trek. Maybe I consciously chose that I couldn't see it continuing and just didn't do anything more with it. But that didn't last more than a couple of weeks. Yeah, so I think I've seen a lot of people online talking about the idea of running a Starfleet campaign, Starfleet Academy campaign, and it certainly interests people for some reason. Maybe because of the Interplay game. Is it doable? Yeah, I think it probably is. But I think you've got to make it a very character-driven campaign, and it's probably best to not focus too much on the simulations, instead build up a long-term campaign arc that the players get to deal with outside of class time. Rules-wise, could be a little bit complicated. You maybe have to figure out a system for ensuring that they actually aren't very competent yet. They haven't. I mean, they're supposed to be Starfleet Academy material. They're supposed to be, pretty smart, pretty good at what they can do, but they haven't learned things so much yet, and so probably best not to give them as great skills as they should get once they've graduated and had a few years' experience and become full Starfleet officers. But in principle, I think the idea could work. Am I ever going to try it again? I have no plans to. But it was interesting. It was a lot of mistakes for me to learn from. And if you can't do that as a GM, you're never really going to ever get to be a better GM. So it wasn't great, but I don't really regret it either.